There were tough races fought from end to end in this province. Here to give us the regional perspective on the outcome of federal election 2019, from our studio at Confederation College in Thunder Bay, our Northwestern Ontario Hub editor, Jon Thompson. In Ottawa, via Skype, Shelby Lisk, head of our Ontario Hub that covers Indigenous issues. From our studio at Queen's University in Kingston, David Rockne Corrigan, our Eastern Ontario Hub editor. And in our studio at Western University in London, Mary Baxter, who covers southwestern Ontario for us. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have everyone here. I hope you guys are all well rested. Now, you've all watched the election campaign closely. Any surprises, upsets, or highlights to talk about? I'm going to start with Mary. Mary, give us the lowdown. Anything there?
Well, Jeyan, it was mostly status quo in the election here in southwestern Ontario, where Conservatives took the rural ridings, as they have for the past many years. And in all of that sea of blue, we've seen Liberal and red and orange in the urban areas, with one big exception. That's in the Windsor-Essex region, which, as you may know, has long been kind of a stronghold for the NDP. And last night we saw one of those, they have three ridings there. One of the ridings went Conservative, the rural one. And then another one, one of the urban ridings went Liberal. And so now there's only one NDP riding left in that area.
Very interesting there. I'm going to jump over to David. David, any upsets, any highlights, any surprises?
Sure, Jeyan. So Mary used the phrase status quo. That's sort of what I'm seeing here in Eastern Ontario. I'll start, though, with a fun riding, which is the riding we've spoken about during this election before and in the provincial election, which is Peterborough-Kawartha. We've referred to it as the bellwether riding because it has a track record, both provincially and federally, of voting for the party that forms government. And last night was no exception. We had Maryam Monsef trying to defend her seat, and she was victorious with about 39% to the 35% of the vote for the Conservative candidate in that riding. So Peterborough-Kawartha kept its tradition going of voting for the party in government. And then in the rest of Eastern Ontario, it's mostly hold. So, Conservative seats stayed blue, Liberal seats stayed red, with a couple of exceptions in Hastings, Lennox, and Addington. That flipped from Liberal to Conservative. And just south of Peterborough, in Northumberland, Peterborough South, that also flipped from Liberal to Conservative. But again, much of the situation here in Eastern Ontario remains the same as it did before the election.
I wouldn't lie to you if I didn't say that I kept my eyes on Peterborough-Kawartha all throughout last night. I'm going to jump over to Shelby. Any highs and lows from last night?
Yeah, so this election was a little bit more quiet on Indigenous issues than the one in 2015, but there was a really strong moment from NDP leader Jagmeet Singh when he was in Grassy Narrows. A reporter asked him if the NDP party was planning to write a blank check to solve all problems in First Nations communities, including the lack of clean drinking water. And in response, Singh turned the question back on him, asking, would you be asking this question if Vancouver or Montreal or Toronto did not have clean drinking water? And continuing, he asked him, why is this even a question of whether or not Indigenous people deserve to have clean drinking water?
And Shelby, any lowlights from the campaign?
Yeah, so there was a few low points during the federal leaders debate, one being simply the lack of Indigenous voices at the debate. So APTN had tried to get an Indigenous reporter into the event and they were denied. And then there was also a controversial statement by Andrew Scheer. He was saying that the Conservative Party would support parts of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, but that he said the Conservative government won't let Indigenous people hold hostage large projects. And so that goes against what it says in UNDRIP, that Indigenous communities deserve free, prior, and informed consent to any projects that are happening on their land.
Jon, I'm going to jump to you. I don't know if we call this a nail biter, but I'm going to get you to explain one of the ridings. This was one that you were watching closely and many people were watching. A surprise there.
The stories the Conservative Party in northwestern Ontario this morning, Jeyan, and nowhere more so than the Kenora riding, 21-year-old Eric Malilo comes out of being the head of the Conservative club at Lakehead University to unseat Liberal incumbent Bob Nault and beat Grassy Narrows Chief Rudy Turtle, the star NDP candidate. In both of the Thunder Bay district ridings, the Conservatives performed better than they had in a generation. So tell Steve Paikin that I'm with him today in wondering whether the Premier Ford should have been stumping for the party. There's only one place he did that, and it was in the Northwest, where they performed better than they have in a generation.
Very interesting stuff there. Now, I want to talk about the issues. Of course, throughout the election campaign, we've been covering issues from childcare to climate to infrastructure. Mary, I'm going to jump to you. You looked at the high cost of childcare in our region. Will that improve? Will that change with the new government?
Well, actually, it's interesting because in our region, as in so many different areas of Ontario, even finding childcare can be a real challenge. There's communities that don't have licensed childcare facilities, and the Liberals are aware of this challenge. They've made promises to boost childcare. Certainly in the region, they've well, actually across Canada. They've promised before and after school programs more money towards those, and to also help parents who might have unusual working times. And the NDP as well has seen this problem, and they've pushed for legislation for a national childcare program. Both parties kind of have that vision of national childcare programming. But the NDP wanted to move faster towards it. They wanted to pass legislation to support it. The Liberals were doing it more in increments. I actually don't expect it to change much from the initial vision with the Liberal Party, even though that they're going to have to be working with the NDP likely on some issues at least. I will see them move probably as planned, because they have so much on their list.
Thanks for that. Now, David, you reported on flooding in Eastern Ontario and climate change as well. Curious, what does the future look for funds and solutions to help that?
Sure. So the flooding for many people along Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River and in the Ottawa Valley, flooding has been a big story in 2019 and in 2017. And one of the factors that's sort of become a source of controversy is what's called Plan 2014. And this is a water management plan by the IJC, the International Joint Commission, and it manages the water flows through the Moses Saunders Dam in Cornwall. And it's become a source of controversy because some people believe that this agreement, which was signed by the Liberals a couple of years ago, is partly responsible for the flooding. So two of the candidates who actually have been the most outspoken on this, Michael Barrett, Conservative Michael Barrett, and Conservative Cheryl Gallant, they've actually both won their seats. So I expect that to be a continual source as we get into the next Parliament of controversy. I know Cheryl Gallant, who represents Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke, says that she will fight for people to get compensated for the flooding, and she blames the Liberals for signing this agreement. Now, the Liberals, for their part, you know, they signed they made a flurry of funding announcements with regards to flooding infrastructure. So I know that this is on their radar as well. So it will be interesting to see how the federal government approaches this problem of flooding over the next couple of years.
Now, this election saw a record-setting number of Indigenous candidates, and notably, Jody Wilson-Raybould from Vancouver Granville was re-elected as an independent. Shelby, can you give us a breakdown of how many Indigenous candidates actually won?
Yes, so we did see a record number of candidates across Canada, with 62 Indigenous candidates running this year. Of those 62, 27 were notably running for the NDP, and six Indigenous MPs took seats this election. Jody Wilson-Raybould obviously was very exciting, and also a newcomer, 25-year-old Mumulak Kakak, took her riding in Nunavut, which is also very exciting. Now,
some Indigenous leaders sent some messages to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Twitter last night. What did they say?
Yeah, so Assembly First Nations Chief Perry Bellegarde he congratulated Justin Trudeau and said that he was looking forward to continuing to work with him on the momentum to keep priorities of First Nations at the forefront. And then some other people were not as kind on Twitter. Pam Palmater, she said that this election Trudeau won because of the fear of Scheer, and she said that Trudeau has a lot of work to do to make amends for broken promises to Indigenous people over the last 4 years. And in her words, she said, "This election is not a blank check for pipelines and continued genocide."
Jon, I'm going to move to you. One of the focuses was on boil water advisories, of course. Indigenous communities have been waiting for quite a while. It's something that we've covered for quite a while on this show. How likely is it that the work on the boil water advisories will progress now?
Well, I think it's important to say this story is very much alive. On the day of the election, Sachigo Lake First Nation was added to the long-term boil water advisory list. So the advisory has been going on for so long that they're back on the list. Kiiwetinoong MPP Sol Mamakwa tweeted out that North Spirit Lake was getting 25,000 pounds of water being brought in because of broken machinery in the plant there. So again, this is an evolving story day by day. The Liberals and the NDP both campaigned on ending long-term boil water advisories by 2021. And that is the date that Indigenous Services Canada says that that's going to be complete. I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. There's no one I have spoken to on the ground in this industry, in this region, who believes that that is possible in northwestern Ontario.
And David, there's some interesting stuff about the student vote. Give us some numbers down there.
Sure. So I had written about the student vote, which is a parallel election that has been happening over the last week and a half. And the results for that also came out last night. And again, they're really interesting. We had a 1.1 million students in elementary and high school across the country, and all 338 ridings voted. And like the rest of the country, they voted a Liberal minority. And just like the rest of the country, actually, the Conservatives got the highest percentage of the vote, though in the student election, they ended up with a third most seats. So just like 2015, another very similar outcome in the student vote as to the adult vote with a Liberal minority parliament.
Always a pleasure. It's very rare to get you guys on the show, but again, it's very important to get that regional perspective. Again, thank you very much to Jon, Shelby, Mary, and David Rockne Corrigan. Thanks again, guys.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.